Good morning. I hope you all got your coffee and are ready to start a great week with us. Welcome to the ESIP July meeting. I am Susan Shingledecker, ESIP's Executive Director. Each day over the last few weeks, it was exciting to see registrations come in. And I am excited to share that I just heard that this is ESIP's largest in-person meeting with over 400 people here in Asheville and online. Traveling to meetings provides us with an opportunity to learn and experience new places, cultures, and stretch and grow ourselves. Back in January, I gave you all a homework assignment, and I shared the Buncombe County story map with you, detailing the history of the creation of the state of North Carolina and the truly tragic history of the treatment of the indigenous peoples who have lived on these lands for generations. If you missed it, please take time this week to learn more. As a child, I recall learning about the Trail of Tears, but being here on this land brings greater impact to its history. It is important that we learn about the past and also look to what we can do in the present and the future. On Wednesday, our plenary will feature a member of the Cherokee Nation, Western Cherokee, who today works for the Eastern Band of Cherokee here in North Carolina, to hear about their work. I'm also proud to share the accomplishments of ESIP's Sustainable Data Management Cluster on the recent publication of their paper on guidance to repositories for implementing the CARE principles. That was published in the Data Science Journal. Learning about and recognizing our past can fuel our work going forward. To me, it ties in with our overall theme this week, grounded in trust. Data ethics empowers collaboration. Trust is so easily broken, as it was with the native peoples of this region. Trust takes time to build. I hope in our work here this week that we can make meaningful steps to build trust with each other and with our communities. Grounded in trust. This also comes down to an individual level and our interactions with one another. At ESIP, we are guided by our community participation guidelines that outline expected and unacceptable behaviors, not only during our meeting this week, but in our interactions with one another throughout the year. You can find them here, as well as access to our reporting mechanisms. In short, if you experience unacceptable behavior, we urge you to report it and let us know. I want ESIP to be a people-first culture organization, and you all help us build and cultivate that. Calling out inappropriate behavior makes us stronger. It is not a thing that should be feared, and so we encourage you to use the mechanisms that we've built and put in place. You can report through our online mechanism. You can also identify members of the board or staff by our name tags. Speaking of name tags, for those of you here in Asheville, we have designed a fun badge networking game this week. Facilitating networking is one of the reasons we come to in-person meetings. It's really hard to do online. So we want you who are here to take advantage of that, and we want to help you make those connections. So the name badge game, the instructions are online. The first 25 people to complete the game and bring your initial name badge to the Welcome Center will receive a prize of some amazing local Asheville chocolate. So that is, if you needed a little kick to, step outside your comfort zone and meet some new people, I will bribe you with chocolate to meet new people. Another way we want to encourage deliberate networking will be at lunch today and tomorrow. We're going to offer something called Birds of a Feather. ESIP has done this in the past. We haven't seen it in a few years. We're bringing it back. So if you have a topic that you want to talk with people about, we encourage you to make a sign and put it on a table at lunch. It could be something really technical and ESIP related. It could be who loves core or ESIP wiki, love or hate, whatever topic you want to cover, or it can be something more lighthearted, your favorite books, your favorite TV shows, just a way to bring people together around common interests and ideas. I'm really excited to welcome our first-time attendees. At last check, we have 40% of our attendees are first timers. That is incredible. Woo! So I encourage our first-time attendees at lunch in this space around 1:00. We're going to move to this side of the room, and we have staff and board members that are here to answer all your questions about ESIP, to help orient you. ESIP is not just a once-a-year, one-week conference. We are active 52 weeks a year, and we want to meet you. We want to get to know you. We want to hear how we can connect you into the broader community throughout the year. So we look forward to seeing you at the newcomer meet and greet. That will be held in person and virtually. So there, for those of you online, there is a Zoom link for that in Sketch. And then this evening, we will have our opening reception with light hors d'oeuvres and beverages. It will be here in this space. Hopefully, if the weather's nice, we can extend out onto the patio and get some fresh air. So we invite all of you to come to that opening reception this evening. Now that you have a sense of today's agenda, it's a packed week. So I've asked Denise Hills, ESIP's board president, to run you through some of the activities the rest of the week.
Which is the advanced? Sorry, I never remember to do the tech run ahead of time. Welcome. For those of you that I haven't met yet, I am Denise Hills. I am honored to be the ESIP board president. And welcome to Asheville, and welcome to those online. My very first ESIP meeting, I actually attended virtually back in 2012. So there's a long history of us doing in person and having some sort of virtual connection. And truly, we're just going to go over some highlights of what's going on this week. There's so much more going on that we're not going to be talking about today. And so I encourage you to talk to people, find new people to say hi to, and learn about what else is going on. Tomorrow evening, yes, today is Tuesday. Sorry. It's been a long week already. Tomorrow evening, we have our research showcase where we have posters and demos of all sorts of incredible things that you can meet and greet and talk with people and connect on a little bit more of a one-on-one level. Let's see what's next. There's no notes. Where'd the notes go? Okay, sorry. I was expecting to have some notes. Anyway, one thing we're trying this year that we haven't done before is our Dine Around Asheville. There is a sign up. Use the QR code and or the link in Sked. I would recommend the link in Sked personally. I had a hard time with the QR code to sign up for group dinners. Don't worry if you don't know somebody. There are group reservations at several local restaurants. Thanks to our ESIP vice president and one of our local hosts, Douglas Rao. Sign up. Go to dinner with some new people. Get some really great food because all of these places are great. And also let us know how that works. We like to try new things. Thursday, one of my favorite parts of the in-person ESIP is celebrating people in person. And this year, we at our awards luncheon, I'm especially pleased that our Raskin Scholar, Brandon Whitehead, will be here to speak to us, and we get to celebrate him in person. Thursday is also our unconference. With so many new attendees, I suspect some of you don't ever have had experience with an unconference. These are sessions developed by you here, ideas that maybe you want to pursue a little bit more, didn't make it into the schedule, maybe are a little bit less structured. How this works, you come up with an idea, you list it on the board by the Welcome Center, right? And over by where the breakout sessions are. And Thursday at the end of lunch, after our awards lunch, you come up and you give a 2-minute pitch to convince people to come to your session, to your unconference session. It's beautiful and fun, and you get some really great conversations out of that. Speaking of really kind of fun things, we have something that we call Funding Friday. And this is your time to pitch an idea for a small amount of funding provided by ESIP to be undertaken in the next 6 to 12 months. These are very small dollar amounts, and I'm sorry, I forget what they are. But there's categories for ESIP partner participants and students. Thursday evening, we will have a gathering event where you can brainstorm ideas with people. You generate a poster using markers and stickers and whatever you may have that you will then get to essentially sell to people on Friday morning. And if you've never been here for a Funding Friday Pitch It competition, you're in for a treat. It is one of my favorite parts of an ESIP in-person meeting, where we get to hear all the wonderful, exciting ideas that people have to do something with their colleagues here. And it may be you don't know anybody here, but you may meet somebody at that event on Thursday night that has a similar idea, and you can collaborate. It's a great experience. I already did talk about the pitches will be Friday morning. You must be present to give your pitch. So if you're leaving Friday morning, I'm sorry, you can't be part of Funding Friday. You must be present to give your pitch. But it is wonderful. Like I said, it's one of my favorite parts of ESIP. Also on Friday, we have our annual business meeting. Now, the business meeting, don't think that you're not invited, right? Everybody is welcome to come to the business meeting. Think of it not just as the time when we can conduct some necessary business of ESIP, but you get to learn about where ESIP as an organization is, but it's also your time to contribute back to what ESIP can be. And the next slide, I hope, is yes. We're trying something a little bit different with our annual business meeting. This really is intended to be an interactive event. As many of you know, we recently updated our mission, vision, and ESIP's mission, vision, and values. We also have had strategic themes. We are about midway through our current strategic themes cycle, so it is actually time to start thinking about what's next. And unfortunately, this is really where I needed my notes. It's totally fine. We have Mark Parsons has led this effort for us. Oh, thank you. Thank you for making that bigger. Mark Parsons has led this effort to look at our strategic themes and be very thoughtful about how we're going about this. So this week, we want you to help us make visible the value of ESIP to this community as a whole and beyond. Between now and Friday afternoon, you're going to have some opportunities to place your responses on a beautiful tree that I don't think will get put up until tomorrow, unfortunately, but our tree where you get to answer some questions that we have. How have you and your work benefited from ESIP activities? These are the fruits of ESIP. So what value have you gotten from ESIP? How does ESIP provide? What does ESIP provide that is core? What is the foundation, the roots of it, or the trunk, the base? Some work gets nurtured and that then takes flight, things that go beyond ESIP. We want to hear about that as well. How have you seen ESIP making a broader impact? What other forces are at play? All of these we're going to try and synthesize a little bit throughout the week. And then during our business meeting, we'll have an opportunity to work on this and synthesize it a little bit more. We really want the community to be contributing to our strategic direction. So thank you for, please come and participate in that. ESIP also would not be here without our sponsors, particularly our meeting sponsors this year. Asheville is our local sponsor. AGU has been a long supporting showcase sponsor. Element 84 is our sustainability sponsor. The Riverside is our social sponsor, sponsoring Thursday night's event. The Thursday night Funding Friday poster making event is unlike previous years where we've had to purchase our own food and beverage. There will be some food and beverage provided by our social sponsor. ESRI and SSAI, vital work. There are caffeine sponsors. There are coffee break sponsors. So we do I very much appreciate them. I would not be functioning for the rest of this week without that. And please use SCED to, the QR code is there to look at all the other wonderful things that are going on throughout the week. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Susan.
So Denise gets the tap dance award, right? Anyone who's been around ESIP a while knows that we are Google Docs, we are Google Sheets, we are Google Slides. And when you make updates to your Google Slides, like maybe the morning of, and it's already been exported to PowerPoint, that doesn't go so well. So thank you, Denise, for being so graceful under pressure. I appreciate it. It's a lot, right? Like Unconference Funding Friday, poster session, receptions, right? There's a lot going on. SCED is your main place to find everything. Even that tree, our brainstorming for our strategic planning, there will be a link to our Miro board in SCED. It's not there yet. It will be there very soon. So you can contribute to that virtually, especially those of you not in the room. And then once our poster boards are set up, we'll be able to display the big tree and you can contribute to it physically as well. So SCED is really your hub for all things for the meeting. And then the staff are available to answer any questions that you have. Funding Friday, how much are the awards? What's the eligibility? How does that work? Come see us. You can either message us online. We have staff that are supporting virtually this week. And we also will have staff always at the Welcome Center, which is that kind of round area near where the breakout rooms are. So with that, it is now my pleasure to bring up our opening plenary panel. When finding plenary speakers, we this year had an embarrassment of riches of people who said, yes, I would love and come to talk to ESIP. And I'm especially excited for our opening plenary panel today. So first, I would like to introduce, we have Deek Arndt, who is the director of NOAA's NCAI. We have Dr. Dominique Diop-Duval, who is the Deputy Chief Data Officer for the Department of Commerce. And we have Ariella Zuckerman, who is newly appointed the director of the 6th National Climate Assessment. Unfortunately, she came down with COVID and will be joining us by Zoom, but I would like to welcome Dominique and Deek up to the stage.
Oh, a little bit of variety. Hello, everybody. I am Deek Arndt, the director of the National Centers for Environmental Information. I think my slides will pop here in just a sec, or do I need to make that happen? And, all right. Okay, there we go. All right. Yay. Okay, cool. I'm here to welcome you. So I am with, again, NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information. which is where the nation's Earth system observations begin their second career after they serve their first purpose to inform watches, warnings, fisheries, and ocean purposes. We are headquartered in Asheville, right down the street, downtown, but we have four communities that support 4 campuses across the nation. So Boulder, the Stennis Space Coast, Silver Spring, Maryland also support much of the work that we do. Next slide, please. There we go. All right. So we are part of the Department of Commerce. Being headquartered in Asheville, I want to share a little bit of a story with you. So 204 years ago, this Buncombe County, we're in Buncombe County, as Susan mentioned, Felix Walker, our representative, like a lot of us Southern fellers, kind of a long-winded blowhard in Congress, stood up to give one of his very, very famously long speeches. And coming from Buncombe County, he said, I rise today to speak to Buncombe, and gave a 1-hour soliloquy to an empty House of Representatives. And so the term Buncombe, Buncombe County, became the Buncombe that we know, which meant a bunch of nonsense, right? And that got shortened to Bunk. And then now we are all in the business of harboring or constructing or sharing the truth through the information that we have. And we do a lot of debunking of mythology out in the world. And so on behalf of those of us who are from Asheville, I welcome you, and I'm proud to share the name of our county to your very important work of harboring and constructing and sharing the truth. So that's us. NCEI is again part of NOAA. NOAA prides itself on science, service, and stewardship. NOAA's mission, as many of you know, is to understand and predict what's going on in our environment, to share what we know, and then also to preserve our precious resources. And NCEI maps those 3 as well: science, stewardship, and service. Science in our world is making sure that our data does match the truth, that the numbers that we produce have fidelity to the Earth system. Stewardship, meaning that we can provide the provenance and line of sight and accessibility and findability, all of the values that you cherish in this organization. And then service, it ain't authoritative, it ain't truthful if people aren't using it. And so making sure that we're able to not just bring our data to the user community, but bring the user community to our data. And so we share these 3 words with our parent agency in NOAA. And when we're at our best, we're at that center of the Venn diagram. Again, data lives a life cycle. I'll share this kind of a few times in a few ways, but one of the things that we've discovered over the 70 years or so of managing information at all 4 of our campuses is it's not just about handling the asset of data. There's the construction element, so turning observations into data and data into data sets into information, and information into higher ordered kind of assessments and products that Dr. Zuckerman will talk about, one of the prime ones of that. But it's about not meeting the user at the end of that value chain, but meeting the user all along. So towards the bottom of this slide, there are many users with many levels of maturity, and some of them we can feed the engine room, which is a community that many of our hardcore data folks in this room are used to working with, the people who take whole data sets, take big information and really grind through it in really amazing ways. But then there's also the people who are making complex decisions, and we kind of call that the boardroom, right? So how do we distill our information, make it more available to people in the complex decision space, where our Earth system information is just one factor in a long equation of all the factors. These could be economic, policy, business decisions that people are making. And then finally, showroom information, products and services that celebrate the truth that is in data, the value that is in data, that invite people into information. And we'll hit a few of those along the way. We represent these at NCEI through tiers of stewardship. So a really similar construct here, and you've probably seen this a few times. I know we've shared this many, many times in this meeting historically. But how much effort do we put raw information, creating data sets, information, services, products, and so on? We refer to that as the tiers of stewardship. So there's a level of investment as you go from left to right in this slide. And then again, one of the things that we like to do is track who's using what, right? So we have about 95,000 documented interactions over the last 6 years or so. People who have called us sometimes to say, your website is broken, or what do I need to get? Or I'm trying to solve this problem. Can you help me find information about ... And our service professionals kind of take that down. And so this is a distillation of those 95,000 or so interactions of who's using us. And as you might expect, the STEM field is really big in what we're doing. So earth sciences information, obviously super important to engineering. The theme of this meeting deals with ethics. And so I'm going to kind of conflate ethics, accessibility, and equity here. And just a very quick run through of some ethics challenges or opportunities that we see, not just in the way that we approach our data, but in the equity and ethics issues that our data might expose, or that might provide insight into. So Dr. Duval Diop is going to talk a little bit about AI and ethics, so I won't dive in too deep here, but we're all aware of the many dimensions of AI and ML, and our folks across NOAA, through the NOAA Center for Artificial Intelligence, dealing with, not just the possibilities of the technologies and the uses and the applications, but the ethical ramifications around those, both in our handling. What can we inform? How do we make sure that we're still harboring and sharing the truth when we celebrate and run into this technology? So I know we have sessions and presentations dedicated to that. Dr. Zuckerman's going to talk a little bit about the National Climate Assessment and bringing all of these issues. So here's what's going on in the climate system, and then here are all the social, cultural, and ethical, moral dimensions around that policy dimension. So, that National Climate Assessment is assembled right down the street here in Asheville. It's kind of coordinated through our technical support unit and our partners at the North Carolina Institute for Climate Studies. And really looking forward to Dr. Zuckerman's presentation of that. But I'll talk a little bit about ours, right? So, obviously one of the things that we do is global temperature. So you've seen this many times before. And so this is what it looks like when good data are handled well by an international community and shared constructively across the space, and to be able to kind of consolidate it into a point. So people who are long since dead are still contributing to this analysis every month when we put it out, and helping maintain the standards, create the standards, meet the standards. We're able to take, shipborne information from 1853 and put it alongside modern observations from 2024 and get a realistic picture of what's going on in our global climate. We have, again, exposing some ethics concerns. Sea level rise, one of the things that several of you are working on. We're certainly involved in that as well. And we talk about sea level rise and the consequences of that, and we think about the ethical dimensions. And when we talk about that in the U.S., it is largely a very expensive problem that we talk about. We talk about the economics and the hassle, and potentially the migration. We're seeing some affluent folks leave coastal communities, come here to Asheville. It's actually one of the concerns that we're wrestling with right now. And so thinking about from a cultural standpoint, we're seeing lots of new money here in Asheville. We have a very, very long-rooted Appalachian culture around here. How does that culture survive and stand up next to an influx of the people who are choosing to migrate here because they have the resources to migrate here? And so there's just sea level rise alone. There's kind of an ethical dilemma. There's some policy overtones. Our information, the information that you make and create, is informing and helping us understand and hopefully helping shape policy around what's going on in the country. And by the way, It may be expensive in Charleston when infrastructure gets some ankle deep tidal flooding events. But if you're in the Bay of Bengal, that's saltwater into subsistence farming, and that's calamity. That's mass human calamity, right? So we have the comfort of dealing right now with an expensive problem in the US, but remembering from an ethical and an equity standpoint that this same issue is presenting itself in other parts of the world to much deeper effect. One of the products we're known for is the US billion-dollar weather and climate disasters. And there's a session here in about an hour. I won't jump into the details of this, but one of the things we're noticing is an increase, especially in the number of the sort of lower end, so to speak, the $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 billion disasters, largely due to severe local storms. So the green part of the bars from 1980 on your left to 2023 on your right is hail and straight line winds and tornadoes and what they damage. And so we're dealing with kind of what's driving that, which is a combination of some climate issues and some economic issues. But one of the ethical dimensions that we're dealing this is, are we, by framing these, are we underrepresenting the poorer communities of the United States, the people who don't have enough stuff to spin the odometer to help us reach $1 billion and understand a big event as a big event? That's an ethical consideration in the way we present data. And thankfully, we've got good people working on that problem right now. Climate extremes. So what you're looking at is an example, or is a documentation of morning time temperatures in the summer in the US. We won't go into the details, but basically the bigger the red bar, the more of the US was subject to extremely warm overnight morning time temperatures in the US. And that's an interesting climate fact. But the ethics considerations buried in this, or perhaps revealed by this, is there's a big chunk of our nation who works outside in the mornings in summer. And if those folks are working in a field or on a rooftop in an 80-degree morning rather than a 75-degree morning, they will reach some heat stress a lot earlier. And many of those same people who are asking to work in our fields and to work on our rooftops, depending on the political mood of the country, do not feel comfortable checking in for medical attention when they have some of this heat stress. So our partners in the Department of Commerce help us understand the demographics. The many bureaus that provide economic, demographic information combined with this climate information can help us understand the strain that those folks are going through, and then the cost to the public of dealing with or not dealing with helping those folks. So there's an ethical consideration right there in plain sight. We could talk about this as a climate graphic and talk about morning time temperatures and the physics and the dynamics that cause summer mornings to increase temperature more than the other seasons. But there's an ethical and policy consideration on that as well. Big heat, again, is increasing mostly at night. So this is Boston, Massachusetts. The graph looks the same for Houston, Texas. The blue represents morning time summer temperatures in the old climate. The red represents morning time temperatures during this century. The shift to the right means that the mornings in Boston are getting warmer. The mornings in Houston are getting warmer. Hypothetically, which is no longer hypothetically, we have Harvey, we have Hurricane Beryl this year. If a hurricane comes around and knocks out power, we have a whole lot of people dealing with much, much warmer mornings without power. Take those hurricane scenarios away, we have a whole lot of people in these communities who are making economic choices about whether I buy shoes, whether I make investments in critical family needs, or whether I turn the air conditioner to a comfortable level. Right? Those are economic, kind of ethical equity considerations related to a changing climate. And with our fellow bureaus across commerce, we're working on better understanding what this means to families. And then finally, big rain is getting bigger is one of the, again, the data that you make and that we harbor and share and that you share indicates that big rain is getting bigger. This is a figure stolen from the recent National Climate Assessment. Again, we could talk about the physics of why big rain is getting bigger, why the biggest events are getting bigger, why more of our annual rainfall is occurring in bigger batches. But the ethical, cultural, equity considerations around this are we often move our most vulnerable people closest to the streams. And big rain here in the Appalachians it has profound landslide and flash flooding concerns. And having worked part of my career in the sort of meteorology emergency management side, I never worked a flash flood disaster in an affluent part of town. And so understanding where people live and the condition that they live in relation to the truth that we represent in our data informs ethical, cultural policy decisions along the way. One of the last ethical considerations we're wrestling with right now is in something called the industry proving ground. So we're working with the insurance industry and the architecture and engineering industry and the retail industry on kind of radically improving their uptake and use of NOAA's environmental information towards a more prepared economy. One of the concerns that we have as an agency ethically is if we share information and the insurance industry becomes even smarter than they are around the climate system and the risks that presents, are we accidentally encouraging them to pull out of certain markets because the risk is so great? And what is the call on that? And like many ethical considerations, there's no real right answer. Is it more just to better inform the insurance industry so that they can make calculated risk decisions and keep broadly policyholder policy rates down? Or is it more ethical to continue services in the communities that are most at risk? I don't know the answer to that, but that is an ethical consideration wrapped around the work that we're doing today that will ultimately need to have a policy decision. So the work that you do, bringing the truth into the complicated landscape of our work is super valuable, but I love that we're addressing ethical considerations in this. And then finally, I will leave you with a story because this has all been a little heavy, and so this story is even worse. So I want to just share a little bit about the value of data and to try to connect. One of the things that we do at NCEI at our 4 campuses is connect the present with the past. And I want to share a story about the value of data, Earth systems data, from long before we were born. So I grew up in Oklahoma. You know a big part of our story, very likely. We went through this thing called the Dust Bowl in the 30s. We lost 1/5 of our population to it through emigration. And we wrote novels about it, right? And so in Oklahoma, in Crowder, Oklahoma, in the 20s, the girl standing on your left there is my grandmother, Idris Grubus. Is her great name, Idris Grubus? The toddler seated is probably her little sister Gladys, and the woman sitting behind them is probably their birth mother, Ludi Hawley. And so this was during good times in the 20s. About 5 years after this picture was taken, maybe 6 years. The events of the day became too much for Ludi Hawley, who was already a single mother, and Idris became the head of the household. So she was a 12-year-old girl dragging her little sister around a pretty scary time and place. And that is not unusual. That happened all across the plains. And it was hard on her, right? There were some bad people in her life. And not to diminish what happened, but that happened to a lot of people. The family units across my part of the world really fell apart in the 30s. I told you it was worse. It does get better. Here's where you come in. Looking at data and not just retrospectively, but if I were to ask one of my drought buddies, I'm a drought guy. If I were to ask one of my drought buddies to go look back at Oklahoma's drought history and pick out the decade that caused all this turmoil, they would say, absolutely, sticks out like a sore thumb. It's the 1950s. People have been using Earth system data to solve problems for a long time. So what you're looking at this graph is that Mother Nature punched harder in the region in the 1950s versus that decade that we wrote novels about. People were already using the data that you steward, that you create, that you make, that you share to make decisions about water management, soil management, crop selection, economic information that is now represented by the Department of Commerce, home economics was sort of perfected in the 1930s as part of a larger progressive education movement. So a lot of people have been using data to make a big difference over time. And the only reason I share this story is it seems like an academic exercise, but it really matters. I wouldn't be here today standing here using big words and telling stories about Felix Walker from 1820 if it weren't for people like you helping out regions like mine, to get smarter, to address the challenges that they faced just one generation later. It took one generation to help prepare a whole region of the country to better deal with what the Earth system was throwing at them. And I wake up every morning thanking God for people like you. So please keep up the good work. All right. Thank you.
Wow, Deke. I don't know how I can follow that. Well, it's a pleasure. Let's see, Slido. And I don't know how to get this. What do you call it? The clock started. Don't worry about the clock. Okay. I guess my thumb doesn't work as well as yours. Oh, they're switching the slides? Well, I'll start talking a little bit while we're getting this technical situation in order. I am a first timer to ESIP, and I'm so excited to be here because, I'm a geographer by training, an economic geographer, but of course, dealing a lot with the kinds of data that you work with, satellite imagery, for example. But I also have one of my 4 daughters just changed her major to Earth and Space explorations, and so so she's going to be dealing with a lot with this subject matter, and I'm going to be working over the years to bring her to an ESIP and hopefully get her into these great agencies and organizations that you work for. So thank you for sharing your story. Thank you to Susan and the organizers for the invitation and the welcome. The theme of this conference really strikes a chord with me because, really working to collaborate to build trust around data and the information that we're putting out there is important because we're all aware of the transformative power of data. And I want to share just a little story. Goodness. There we go. A little story before I jump into the presentation. I worked in Louisiana when Hurricane Katrina hit, and we were implementing programs to address the devastation that people had as they were trying to rebuild. And we were looking at dollars and cents and numbers and things like that. And as folks in the government were advancing their rebuilding programs, they were developing a narrative of progress. We're successful in rebuilding. People are able to come back home, and they were developing this narrative. But what we realized was that narrative wasn't consistent across all of the devastated areas. And when you bring the lived experience to bear of people who are actually on the ground trying to rebuild, couple that with the administrative data and other actual data sets that were being used to kind of justify that narrative, this is where you saw the disconnect. And so I worked with a group of community leaders, and we went into the field in Lower Ninth Ward in Louisiana, and of course, kind of documented all of these abandoned homes that were not able to be rebuilt, and we put that on a map. Combine that with the administrative data that people were using to justify this narrative of progress to really demonstrate that no, rebuilding was unequal. So on this map on the right, you see a lot of gray squares. Those are the demolished or abandoned, unaddressed homes. And the blue squares are those people who were able to rebuild. So not only do you have the devastation of people who are not able to come back, represented by these gray squares, but you also have that psychological impact of people who were able to rebuild, were in their homes surrounded by devastation. So, just the narrative and making sure that we connect the numbers, the technical information with that lived experience is really important. And to me, that's where the transformative power of data comes in. So as we spend the next few days listening to each other, learning from each other, I'm hoping that we center this recognition that the way we collect, protect, and secure the privacy of data, the way we govern and utilize it, has profound implications for our society. The narratives that we develop based on that analysis have profound implications especially for the underserved and for marginalized communities. And at the heart of the Department of Commerce's mission is the creation of those conditions that will foster economic growth and opportunity for all. So how we use information, how we use data is key to that, not only the data that we collect, but how we use it. And our strategic goals, because of this, our strategic goals that we have developed are also intertwined with our equity goals. Those goals are driven by the belief that equity is not only good for business, of course, it's good for everyone. And the data acts as a bridge to unlocking equitable access to opportunity and sustaining an inclusive economy. So I firmly believe that if we center equity and clearly communicate that to the public, we will increase the trust in the data that we're putting out there. So we are in a shifting public data landscape, as you all know. We have, in the past, the federal government was a dominant user. The statistical system was nearly a monopoly, and output was mostly in tabular format or in reports that were put out there. Source data was difficult to collect and costly, and privacy and confidentiality risks were minimal. And computation, as you know, was limited. But now we're in a situation where we have so many more diverse users. We have more organizations that produce similar statistical products, and we have output that's varied and complex and put out there in visualization and tools on so many different platforms, including TikTok, the source of all the news for the young people. Data is accessed electronically online and or in secure servers, and source data is more abundant, whether it's structured or unstructured. Privacy and confidentiality is much more of a risk and a problem now. And, we have computation that's vastly improved. So this shifting landscape has implications, presents new challenges and opportunities related to data governance and data quality. And how do we ensure that the information that's out there that people are making decisions on, including TikTok news, I'm always telling my daughters, that's not the authoritative source of news. Please don't base your decisions on that. Although they did hear about a certain change in the political landscape on TikTok before I did. But anyway, yeah, we have to increase the robustness of our governance frameworks based on this shifting landscape. And this is what we're doing at the Department of Commerce. Data is the backbone of our decision making. It's that critical resource, and we need to put forth our policies and plans to ensure that we're able to govern it properly. So I have over here a few of our policy documents, and I can promise you that these are not gathering dust on a shelf. For example, the goals that are put out here, one of the goals I want to highlight is the need to focus on expanding opportunity and discovery through data. That goal and the associated objectives to improve commerce's data usability and to advance ethical and responsible and equitable data practices are guiding our actions on a daily basis. We're using these plans and we're having that influence how we make our decisions and how we invest in people, processes, technology. Another objective that's really relevant to me is to govern and manage data as a strategic asset. And by doing that, we can enhance our capabilities and our culture in a way that emphasizes data maturity across the department. So NOAA is an extremely mature bureau within our department, but we have other bureaus that need more work in order to be able to attain that level of data maturity. And there's also a lot of work to do across even the most mature bureaus. Another goal that's really important is actively cultivating a modern data workforce, our existing workforce, upskilling them, but also bringing on new talent. And this is something that's really important because, we need to also ensure that those people that we're bringing in, the people that we're upskilling, are using data in the right way. You've heard Deke and I mention ethics, ethical, equity, privacy, security. And this is because data ethics really governs how the Department of Commerce uses our data. So we have a Commerce Data Ethics Framework, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. And as a data agency, as America's data agency, we have this responsibility to lead the charge to ensure responsible and ethical data practices. And we have the responsibility to ensure the people who are working within our agencies are adhering to these principles. We talk a lot about, a diverse federal data workforce and ensuring that people are approaching their work from a perspective that has minimal bias. But each and every one of us is biased. And just listening to Deke tell his story, the stories about, the Appalachian community and the importance of addressing the challenges and the vulnerabilities that exist there, he kind of opened my eyes to my own biases. Because for me, when I think about vulnerable communities, I'm thinking about Black and Brown communities. And so really opening up our minds, recognizing each one of us has biases when we're approaching our work, and continuing to push ourselves to get beyond that is really important. Data collection is also a critical first step in how we implement this data ethics framework. As I said before, we're committed to improving the usability, accessibility, timeliness, and granularity of the data that we collect, and making sure that it's safeguarded in accordance with our data ethics framework. We are modernizing our data ecosystems and implementing these practices to protect the most vulnerable of us. And as we keep this in mind, we have to develop innovative ways to address issues like low response rates, to our surveys. This is a real issue. And sometimes the innovations that we're trying to put in place to address the gaps that are left by that could be increasing vulnerability or increasing the risk of issues affecting vulnerable communities. So we have to be careful to really frame and ensure that we are keeping data ethics in mind as we work to implement innovations to address some of these issues. Another thing that we need to do is, as we implement new changes to our data collection, we have to also take into account the need to adhere to those principles. You may have heard of the Statistical Policy Directive 15, which was implemented this summer. This is going to fundamentally change how we collect information on race and data, not only in our census data collection efforts, but also in our administrative data collection efforts, not only in the federal government, but also in state and local government. And this is also going to change how the private sector folks, companies like ESRI, organize, their platforms and their tools. So this is going to have implications across the board, and we have to ensure that we are keeping data ethics to bear as we seek to have more granular information on the people that we're serving. Inclusive data practices, as I mentioned before, who we bring on board matters, and making sure that the people that we are bringing on board are aware of and working to actively address the biases that they bring to their work. We also need to equip them with tools to be able to do that in a concrete way. You can tell folks, yes, you need to address your unconscious bias and give them training, for the morning, and they don't really understand how to operationalize that. So giving them tools like the Equitable Data Playbook, which was put out by the Department of Commerce a few months ago, is something that can be a concrete set of practices and guidance to help folks understand how to put into place the data ethics framework that we have in place. Let's see. Another area that I want to talk about is really AI. Getting our data ready for AI. This is something that everyone is talking about in every conference. It's almost become just a regular routine thing. But really, it's really important, and it's a priority for the Department of Commerce across the board. We want to take our data, which is, there's still a lot of work to make it machine readable, where, it's structured in a way that machines can actually use it and process it. But we want to go from that to making it machine understandable. And this involves not only that structured, making sure it's structured, but also ensuring that it has semantic clarity, that it has that context that the machine can be able to take and understand the meaning of the prompts and the queries that we're putting to draw information from that data. So this may mean, creating knowledge graphs for variable level metadata that allow the systems to link these human terms to data elements so that they can be able to extract the appropriate meaning. It may mean embracing standardized ontologies such as NEAM or schema. NEAM is the National Information Exchange Model, which was created by DHS and DOJ, and it may mean harmonizing and linking these various ontologies and vocabularies and definitions. We put out a request for information for AI ready open government data assets, and it just closed in July 17th. And we had almost, I think, 40 responses from industry and academia, basically to better understand, how do we develop standards and guidelines that not only the Department of Commerce can use, but government agencies across the board can use in order to make our data more accessible and more usable and used in an appropriate way by AI technologies. And so we had 5 different areas that we looked at that we asked for feedback on. The first being data dissemination standards. How do we develop standards that support this human readability, this understandability, what kinds of formats and metadata and documentation we need to put in place to prioritize that, and what standards that do those metadata need to adhere to. We asked for feedback on data accessibility and retrievability, and this is to consider when users are disseminating AI-ready data, how do they incorporate the needs of those people so that they can make sure that it's accessible to everyone, including atypical users. We wanted feedback on what measures we needed to take to ensure user-friendly interfaces, and then understand the needs of data users, in terms of labeling and readable formats, et cetera. We asked for feedback on partnership and engagement, and this is something that's really important for ESIP. So if you have feedback on this RFI, we're still engaging with partners so that we can get additional information as we develop these guidelines. So we'd love to hear from you about how best we can engage, how can we collaborate, and how can we ensure that the standards that we develop enhance the data quality, integrity, and usefulness for the work that you're doing. Data integrity and quality, developing those security protocols, ensuring and promoting transparency in the sourcing and processing of the data, and collectively addressing the challenges related to authenticity. All of this is important, and we asked for feedback on that. How do we make sure that the data are quality and are used in appropriate ways? And then, of course, this is not last, but it's not least just because it's last, but how do we ensure privacy? How do we protect, intellectual property rights? And how do we focus on ensuring that the data are used to achieve those equitable outcomes that we're trying to work towards? And so we've gotten a lot of feedback. It's a lot. Several folks that responded to this wrote like 30 or 40 page papers in response. So we're going through this. Thankfully, we're working with a PhD candidate to kind of do that review. But this is really critically important to the work and really opening up. I think this is another way that we build trust when we're working to implement these kinds of initiatives, seeking the feedback, the engagement, and the perspectives of folks like you in the room, both internally to the Department of Commerce, but also externally, is really important to building that trust, especially if you can see reflected in the guidelines, the feedback that you provided. So I think that. Oh yeah, this is the last thing I wanted to say is that in conclusion, when we're moving forward with developing a new data strategy. Our current data strategy ends in 2024. September 30th, 2024, and we're in the process of developing a new data strategy. We're doing this in a participatory manner, where we're engaging with partners across the department in a series of subject matter expert interviews, visioning sessions, so that we can kind of develop this strategy from the ground up. I don't think I can say much more about that, but I'm really excited to engage with DEEC and others in NOAA and other bureaus in the department to really incorporate your perspectives and your learnings to ensure that we're able to develop those cross-bureau initiatives and develop products and continue to experiment and innovate. And one of these products that I put out here is an experimental data product developed by the Department of Census. It's the Climate Impact Frame. I encourage you to look into it. It's something that's an experimental product, so not necessarily endorsed by Census, but it basically develops a individual level set of information on individuals' vulnerability to climate impacts. And this incorporates, they developed a process where they looked at various ways of locating people using tax information, using the master address file, using, external data sources, and so that they can really locate people, and have a definitive, confident sense of where they're located. And of course, combining that with the information that you all are putting out on the environmental conditions of the locations where people are living, and really getting a sense of what is their overall exposure to climate events, and devastating climate events. And we can see that they're on the right side. There's a difference, based on who you are, your vulnerability to climate events. And so these kinds of products, and you taking these products and experimenting with it, providing feedback back to the Department of Census and the researchers that have developed it, can really help us to kind of collaborate together to improve our understanding and the development of these products that can really help us understand where the vulnerabilities exist and how we can address them. And so this is the kind of data that we need to really drive those decisions. So thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions.
Next up, we have Dr. Ariella Zuckerman on Zoom. If we can get her pulled up, please.
Can you hear me?
I think we heard you.
Okay, great. Good morning.
Sounds great.
Awesome. I'm sorry to not be there in person. I was really looking forward to it. I've always wanted to travel to Asheville, but now I'm extra disappointed that I can't be there because I would have competed for Susan's chocolate for sure. But I am glad to be here with you today, virtually at least, and want to thank ESIP for the invitation to speak with you. And I also, just want to thank Deke and Dominique for your really powerful stories that bring data squarely in conversation with equity and ethics. I just think those were really fantastic ways to end a talk and begin a talk. Again, my name is Ariella Zuckerman, and I'm on detail to the U.S. Global Change Research Program and the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy as the director of the 6th National Climate Assessment. Since day one, President Biden has committed to tackling the climate crisis head on and has delivered on the most ambitious climate agenda in history, including restoring the vital role of science in guiding the Biden-Harris administration's decision-making and investments. Actually, Susan, can you maybe mute the microphone? I can hear some feedback. Is it muted? Okay. The National Climate Assessment is a critically important source of climate science for the country, and it enables Americans across the entire U.S. to access authoritative information quickly to make decisions in the fight against climate change. But what makes a report like the Climate Assessment authoritative is its commitment to data ethics and trust, which ensures information in the assessment is inclusive, transparent, and usable. Today, I'm really excited to talk to you about the processes and practices that make that a reality. Next slide. So for those of you who are not familiar with the National Climate Assessment, I'll begin with a bit of background on the U.S. Global Change Research Program and the mandate of the report. Next slide. The U.S. Global Change Research Program, or the U.S. GCRP, was mandated by Congress in the Global Change Research Act of 1990 to assist the nation and the world to understand, assess, predict, and respond to human-induced and natural processes of global change. The program convenes agencies to advance climate and global change science and to provide useful and usable information to decision makers. There are currently 15 agencies that participate in the U.S. GCRP. Next slide, please. So the same law that established the program also mandates a periodic scientific assessment known as the National Climate Assessment, or I'll call it the NCA for short. The NCA is a quadrennial report that analyzes the effects of global change on several sectors: the natural environment, agriculture, energy, land, water resources, transportation, human health, social systems, and biodiversity. And USGCRP is charged with assessing current trends as well as projections for the next 25 and 100 years. Next slide. NCA authors review a very large body of scientific research from very diverse information sources. They synthesize that information, examine the confidence in our scientific understanding, and evaluate uncertainties. The NCA is designed to be policy relevant, not policy prescriptive, and this is a really important point. Authors distill their findings into accessible language framed around risks to people and important resources. And that said, the report will not advocate for a particular viewpoint or a policy measure. Instead, the report uses a range of future projections to help decision makers understand the full extent of possible risks that can be avoided or reduced under different scenarios, and then leaves it up to the decision makers to ultimately determine not only what their risk threshold is, but also what the appropriate response is. The assessment is compliant with all applicable federal laws and policies, including the Global Change Research Act, as well as other laws that govern things like information quality, accessibility, and transparency. And finally, the report process involves extensive review from the public, including several opportunities for public engagement, a review by the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, and several interagency government science review rounds. Next slide, please. To date, the USGCRP has published 5 national climate assessments, the first of which was published in 2001, and most recently in 2023. NCA 6 is scheduled to be released by the end of 2027. Next slide, please. The NCA is further guided by a set of principles and priorities to help ensure that the report not only adheres to the laws that bind it, but that it also is a document that presents the state of the science in a way that is relevant and usable to a wide range of potential users. Data and the ethics that guide them are central to these priorities and principles. Next slide, please. While the NCA 6 development process has recently launched, NCA 5 is the report on record until the publication of the next assessment. So in keeping with the theme of the meeting and this question of data ethics, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the NCA 5's approach to data ethics and finish with some areas that we hope to tackle in the next iteration. So for NCA, data ethics really means 3 things. It means a commitment to inclusivity, thinking broadly about where we get our information and if it's representative of a wide number of people and communities impacted by climate. This includes not only thinking across data forms in science, like the quantitative, qualitative data barriers, but also in ways that connect to different forms of knowing outside of Western science. In this sense, ethics and equity really can't be teased apart. Another data ethic in NCA is a commitment to transparency, ensuring that our data sources and materials are vetted, acknowledged, and made known in such a way that we build trust with the public, so that NCA is in fact an authoritative report because the public thinks it is, not just because we or I say it is. And finally, it means a commitment to usability, both in terms of how the report presents data to be understandable and usable, but also so that we have made efforts to prioritize data across all regions and communities of the US so that people have the information that actually relates to them and have access to that information in ways that they can engage on their own terms. Next slide, please. So within these 3 broad approaches to data ethics, I'm going to review 4 approaches to data use and management in the NCA 5 and how they support inclusivity, transparency, and usability. These are additional source materials, metadata, traceable accounts, and engagement processes. Next slide, please. So the NCA continues to rely on traditional sources of climate information like measurements and observations. Those are not going away. They are fundamental to the report. But in NCA 5, there were some advancements in how data and different ways of knowing were considered and included in the assessment. This is really important for bringing new voices into the assessment and acknowledging that there are many different approaches to scientific knowledge on climate. And this is fundamental to data inclusivity. Author guidance on source materials includes four main categories of sources: peer-reviewed literature, other literature like gray lit, Indigenous knowledge, and other expert and local knowledge. The latter two forms of knowledge, Indigenous knowledge and expert and local knowledge, made it explicit that representations of lived experiences over time, whether or not they're in written form, but rather they're documented in some other way like personal communications, have a place in the assessment, that they are valid sources of knowing. What it also did was define Indigenous knowledge and distinguish it from local knowledge. The information quality guidance that was given to authors specifically for Indigenous knowledge emerged from a formal government-to-government consultation led by the White House's Office for Science and Technology Policy. Some important aspects of the inclusion of Indigenous knowledge into the assessment include that the knowledge is woven together with other forms of evidence without forcing it into non-Indigenous frameworks, so that it kind of stands on its own. That knowledge holders consented to the use of their knowledge and maintain control of the sources. Reference in the assessment is free of any sensitive information, including considerations of how documentation may be subject to or released under the Freedom of Information Act, and that the knowledge consists of repeated observations or understandings built and maintained over time and shared or passed down through generations. So these are really different ways of even developing data and managing data that are separate from some of the other information quality standards that are expected in the report. And then we added a third additional source material that was called out specifically, and those were case studies, which were identified in guidance on how to write about response options. And this is really in response to an audience request to understand examples of what responses look like in practice and how do you learn from them. So this offered a place for qualitative narratives, and we offered two spaces for where you might find those: the EPA searchable case studies for climate change adaptation and the climate resilience toolkit, because sometimes it can be challenging for people who are not familiar with this kind of information to even find it. Next slide, please. As in all NCAs, NCA 5 authors were required to provide documentation for the data and methods used for each figure. This is called metadata. By emphasizing the importance of metadata and creating easy access to the raw information, we increase trustworthiness in the overall report. And this is really important for transparency because it not only provides reference, but it allows readers to understand the data source, the analysis methods, and the visualization tools. That's really important for reproducibility. So it also makes the report a more dynamic reference tool where people interested in deeper dives can easily identify where to begin that process. Authors filled out a metadata survey that included different criteria and questions based on the type of data used in the figure, including qualitative data. Readers can access metadata of any figure in the NCA 5 by clicking the small eyeball icon in the upper right-hand corner of the figure, and that will bring you to a page like the one you see on the right, which describes the metadata for that particular visualization. Next slide, please. NCAs also publish traceable accounts, and in my very nerdy opinion, traceable accounts are the unsung hero of the assessment. They create a window in assessment processes and what data means to it. Traceable accounts describe the document the process and rationale used for reaching conclusions, like those in the key messages, which include calibrated confidence languages and likelihoods. Each traceable account provides a description of evidence base, major uncertainties and research gaps, description of confidence and likelihood, and a process description about how the chapter authors arrived at the findings. Each NCA 5 key message is backed by a traceable account, which describes the type, amount, quality, and consistency of the evidence base. Traceable accounts also describe why some information is not included in those messages because of limited and/or emerging data or scientific uncertainty. Like metadata, traceable accounts are fundamentally important to transparency and not only describe the evidence base, but also the decision-making process authors went through to hone in on their key messages and their confidence levels. To produce an authoritative product, you must stand behind the information and conclusions, and traceable accounts is an open door to that process. Next slide, please. But if we expand the definition of data beyond the supporting data that goes into a graphic or a key message, The engagement efforts of the NCA provide spaces for other data to help shape the end product. NCA 5 public engagement opportunities were multi-directional, both with information being shared by staff and authors, as well as collecting feedback via public comment and participation in workshops. These diverse forms of engagement offer knowledge that lets authors know what would make the report inclusive and authoritative, but also usable. Additionally, engagement can create a sense of trust between the public and the author teams, where listening and explaining processes allows for more communal understanding around the information and its presentation. Information shared between the two is a form of data sharing. For example, during the development of the zero order drafts, each chapter held a public engagement workshop to provide an overview of proposed key messages and talk with stakeholders about what they valued and thought important to be addressed by the NCA. The public also has multiple opportunities to participate in the development process by submitting public comments. Authors are required to respond to each comment and explain their reasoning for inclusion and exclusion. Authors' responses to public and National Academies reviews are available on the NCA 5 download page. These are another form of data that are geared at the process of inclusivity while providing transparency in how the assessment process takes place. Next slide, please. So I'm going to briefly turn to downscaling as a fifth approach. Here, downscale data is not only central to usability and inclusivity, but it's also connected to climate services and data and climate justice and data justice more broadly. Next slide, please. The NCA 5 made significant efforts to improve the data availability and access to downscale data in the NCA by thinking about what data was missing in the climate information being presented. So NCA 5 downscale data products were produced using LOCA 2 and STAR EDSM, the temperature min, temperature max, and precip at about a 4-kilometer resolution. And it used 18 variables in the report. For outside the contiguous US, STAR data with individual stations were included for Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico. For other OCONUS or outside the contiguous US regions, authors were provided guidance on accessing regional or dynamically downscaled data from the CMIP 5 coordinated regional climate downscaling experiment where they were available. But one example about how this data disparity was realized between the continental US and outside the continental US was in the creation of figures and maps. Authors were encouraged to include areas outside of the contiguous US on their maps, making a deliberate effort to include areas like Alaska, the US Caribbean, and the Pacific Islands, which are often absent in observation and measurements that focus on the US, but they face disproportionate risk. So when not possible, authors were asked to include this other information in the figure caption about those impacts in the area and how they're not represented on the map, as well as those data gaps, to really be explicit about how they tried to include them but were not able to. NCA staff recently had a letter published in PNAS emphasizing the need for climate data outside of the contiguous US after reflecting on the challenges of making this guidance for figures with maps a reality. They emphasize that these areas are facing extreme and complex risks and need downscale data that supports their decision-making. Yet despite the outsized need, many observations and measurements just focus on the continental US. So drawing attention to where these data gaps continue to lie is part of the assessment about what we know and what we need to know to address climate change. In many sense, it's a data injustice that we're working to address. Next slide, please. But the NCA is committed to making what we do know accessible and usable. So NCA 5 launched an atlas, which is a digital data viewer developed as an extension to the NCA 5 text and figures. It's available at atlas.globalchange.gov, and it's an accessible way for the public to engage with climate data. Atlas variables were produced with the same methodology as downscale data in NCA 5, and it's an interactive online tool that allows users to explore different scenarios and climate variables to highlight global climate projections. It uses global warming levels for 15 NCA 5 downscale derived variables from CMIP 6 at the county level. It also includes downloadable map layers that people can play around with. Next slide, please. So as we look towards NCA 6, we'll be building on these NCA principles and priorities that have grounded the work in a commitment to inclusivity, transparency, and usability. Foci for NCA 6 include complexity and interconnectivity, looking at the ways hazards and stressors can be realized through compounding and cascading events, both chronic and acute. Data challenges will include looking across hazards and social vulnerabilities and understanding the ways in which different threats multiply the risk over time. It'll be really important for data managers, scientists, and the like to make advances in the ways intersecting hazards and sectors impact each other and or are realized together. And central to this is understanding scale and how social vulnerability intersects with climatic processes. Another focus is on integrated sciences and how we can keep pushing forward, not just to bring new knowledges into the assessment, but how to bring them together to strengthen our understanding of climate change and the risks it brings. Some really important questions are how to produce integrated sciences where there's a sense of belonging and relevance across disciplines and data types. It'll be important to better understand how different types of qualitative and quantitative data manage their privacy and data sovereignty questions, and how those can be brought together in a way where everybody is given the respect and the sort of transparency that is most appropriate to them. And lastly, we want to ensure that the assessment continues to be a powerful communication tool for all sorts of communities. Often it's the first place people go to, or it's the reference they need to understand the state of the field that they're in. How can we improve our coverage of climate observations and measurements for places historically excluded from that information in the US? And how can we move people from step 1 to step 2 in terms of the knowledge they need to address their issues and build solutions? Central to all of these foci is a question of how can these data be used to inform response actions? What are the trade-offs and benefits of whatever action we take in relationship to the predicted risks that are coming from climate hazards? Next slide, please. I want to leave you with a note about how to engage with NCA 6. Technical contributions are still being accepted for NCA 6, and this will be open for quite some time, at least a couple of years, so you can use the QR code or the address at the bottom of your screen to find the submission form. You can attend webinars, workshops during the development of NCA 6 or related to NCA 5 and give your opinions and suggestions about how we can do better next time. You can review and comment on public drafts. You can volunteer as a technical contributor or a review editor. And lastly, you can participate in NCA-related conference sessions, either as a contributor to the assessment or as a user of the assessment. Next slide, please. So I want to thank you all for your time, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Have wonderful conversations. I do have a thread of questions, and I'm just going to ask each of them one short question to kind of start thinking about how I really like the different roles and layers that we have represented in these three speakers and how that fits together into our comprehensive data management process. And so I actually wanted to start out with Ariella while your mic is still active, and wanted to ask you, you covered so many things. Can you comment a little bit on what role does AI play in the National Climate Assessment?
That's still in motion. We're still figuring out what the policy would look like. But what I would want to say is that the most important thing for the climate assessment is that it is a trustworthy document. And how do we ensure that it's trustworthy and that it has scientific credibility is that we are able to trace where the sources of information are coming from and that we are relying on the authors to present that information. So that scientific credibility is really the most important part. And unique to the assessment model is this consensus conversation between the authors. And so, regardless of how AI figures, what we need figures into the assessment, what we will protect is this sort of credibility conversation and the authors' conversations with each other to identify, how do we know that science information is real, is important, to whom is important. Those are human values that are made in those conversations. And so, protecting that is the first and foremost thing that we want to do. And that's sort of the critical thinking that's necessary for the assessment. We don't know yet where AI might be useful to generating new information for the assessment, or what kind of information that will sort of engage with down the line. But I think that's an ongoing conversation to understand, where the opportunities are without sort of putting the assessment itself at risk for not being the credible authoritative source that we know it to be, because of this consensus human conversation model that already is in play.
Thank you for that. Building kind of on that theme, Dominique, I'm curious from you, Department of Commerce perspective, what are some of the challenges to ensuring bias doesn't enter into AI and ML training data sets?
Thank you for that question. This is again, the question of the day. And I think it's a multitude of things that we can do. The first and foremost is, I think, building the understanding and training the people who are developing the data sets, who are working with the data, who are purchasing commercial data sets, to be able to understand how to audit and evaluate them. Because if they don't have that capacity, the assumption is that it's objective, it's produced based on an objective set of rules, and and the data that's going into that is objective and not biased. And so I talked about data collection, how we collect the data, being aware of the challenges, for example, non-response, and what that means for the data that's produced by those data collection efforts, being aware of how to address those gaps. There are some innovations related to how do you impute or create synthetic data to basically fill those gaps, because we weren't able to collect a comprehensive and representative set of data. I think there's bias in the models themselves, the algorithms themselves, and whether or not the data that is being used to train them is appropriate. And all of that it's a complex, I think, process, and it's a chain of events and a chain of people who need to be assessing and auditing and asking the right questions at each stage of the process to address bias in the models that we're using. So.
Thank you for that. And that actually brings me to my question for Deke, because, AI can do a lot, but a lot comes down to people, right? People in this room. So talk to me about the challenges of reconciling the needs you see in today's users and within this community when you think of the incredible opportunities we see in the future. How do we bring people along when we reconcile old platforms and old technologies of early adopters with new opportunities?
Yeah, that's a great question and a challenging space. So we're all kind of in the business of either making, managing, or sharing data, right? Like those of us here. So kind of leaning in on the sharing side. One of our challenges that we're seeing a lot is how do we continue to follow and in some cases lead, but certainly implement the technological advances, the advances in data standards, some amazing possibilities with the computing frameworks that we have, and ability to reach further and deeper into the American economy, the scientific community. At the same time, there are parts of the Earth system user landscape who, in some ways, were early adopters and have been really invested in what we painstakingly call legacy approaches. How do we continue to grow the enterprise and move towards what's possible technologically? It's amazing. This conference, just the agenda itself, is amazing in that way. But how do we do that in a way where we can bring those, and I hate the term legacy users, but how do we bring those legacy users into that new world without penalizing them for being early adopters, pulling the rug out from under them, whatever metaphor you want to bring? I think that's one of the real challenges that we have, because our system information is already informing a great amount of activity across the country. I think about the hundreds of billions of dollars of homeowner and crop insurance policies that are already tied in. That's just the data I know, right? Like, so do we tell the insurance industry, sorry, we're changing, the standards on you. Do we implement, would that cause like a CrowdStrike moment in that industry, right? So how do we balance that? We're never resourced to do everything that we want. But even aside from resources, that's a real challenge and an opportunity for us, because once they get over into tomorrow's applications, going to do even more amazing things. So it's a great question without and the answer is it depends, right? Thanks.
Essentially, we have no answers to the questions.
But I do think that a lot of the answers can be found in the community, right? And in tapping into the resources and the expertise in this room and in others. And no one has to figure it out alone, right? And that's the power of community. Well, join me in giving the whole panel a big hand, and thank you for joining us. So logistics for the rest of today. We have 15 amazing action-packed breakout sessions that will be more interactive. I promise you'll get to use your own voice. I want you to use your own voice. Up next is our coffee break, and we're using that as a way to move you back to the breakout spaces. So there are 3 different ways to get back to the breakout spaces. The shortest way and most adventurous way is out those doors and follow the path back up to there's a little bit of a hill though. So if you don't like hills, don't go that way. There is a fully indoor way where you walk down the corridors of 2 kind of hotel room corridors, or you can also follow the path out around to the front of the hotel. If you need help, there are people that can help guide you on that way. We look forward to seeing you back in this room for lunch and for our newcomers welcome session at 1:00. And then we will also be back in this room for our welcome reception this evening. So I hope you all have a fantastic day, and look forward to seeing you in a variety of sessions.